Thank you very much for your welcome. It's quite amazing to be here. I was here a few years ago, and I think the thing that struck me most about this incredible society, Zoological Society of Chicago, was some of the exhibits in the zoo. I went there and I looked at these beautifully laid out exhibits, at the incredible connections that were talked about, of Lurie the wolf, I think it was, who went from Canada across into the United States. And today we heard it again in the first presentation. It was wonderful to hear about those grizzlies. And talking of incredible connections, the reason that I'm here today is because of Laurie and Ted Suda, who made an incredible connection with my wife when they were out in Kenya. I think she'd just been washed out. An inland tsunami came down the river of Samburu, where we live. And of course, I blame it all on El Nino, which we've also heard about. So it is an amazing experience to come to a place like this. And I've had as much pleasure as you in listening to some of the previous presentations. To hear about penguins and to see that incredible science that Susanna showed us of diving and going out and how far they go. These are all mysteries that are being revealed to us for the first time. We had no idea how far they go out, or the sea lions. And some of the sea mammal migrations really put elephants right down into a smaller category, because they literally go for 3,000 miles up the coast of America, out to the Aleutian Islands and back, the gray whales and the elephant seals. So it's a great joy to be here with you. Now I have to figure this out. Nobody's explained to me. And there's a red knob. All right, we'll try one at random.
That one.
Oh, okay. There we go. Well, you see that we try to save elephants not only in English but also in Chinese. That's a theme that is going to come around again and again, not just for elephants but for many species and ecosystems and natural places. I started in 1965. And in the next year, 1966, I met this magnificent creature who chased me up a tree. Her name was Boadicea, and she had the largest family that we became intimately acquainted with. And I learned what the meaning of the word matriarch is in those years, an undaunted female intelligence who always looks out for her family. My children were born there and grew up there. And we spent the first years of our life in the most amazing situation, surrounded by wild elephants, doing the first behavior study in the wild that looked at individual animals. Now, elephants are very emotional creatures. They're very loving and kind most of the time. But like female mothers, human beings I'm talking about, they sometimes have a little bit too much of little creatures squeaking around their feet. Here are my two children with the famous elephant Eleanor of Savo. And having put up with them for about an hour playing around her, she raised up her left-hand foot and with one magnificent sweep propelled my younger daughter into the ditch, which tells you something about elephants, but also about mothers who take excellent pictures of their children being kicked by elephants. This is my beloved wife, Aurea, who's sorry she's not here today, but she's been with me all this time in our journey and adventure with elephants. So I'm afraid I'm going to skip through those halcyon years to the time when we first had an ivory crisis, which was in 1970. At that time, prices of ivory were rising we knew something was wrong. We didn't know how wrong it was. Nothing was known about the distribution of elephants across Africa at that time. There wasn't even a country that had made a national total. And with the help of many scientists, I set off and went in a small airplane to many of these places. And it was a study that lasted for 5 years. And in it, we discovered there was a horrendous ivory trade that was out of control. In fact, there was a holocaust going on. And that's a long battle that went on for a long time. It took 20 years to even remotely sort it out. And it culminated in the ivory trade ban of 1989, which had an immediate effect. It was a real tipping point. The slaughter of elephants in East Africa immediately stopped to almost zero. Births began to exceed deaths, and populations began to recover after an appalling holocaust that had taken place. Now, personally, we were able to go back to what I really love, which is the study of animal behavior, of elephant behavior. And today, we are working in a place called Samburu in the north of Kenya. It's one of the most breathtakingly beautiful places. There's a river that runs through it from east to west, and the most delightful elephants. I won't say they're tame animals, they're not, but they tolerate us. We can drive in among them. And we have made a study. They are, as I said, deeply emotional animals. They love, they hate, they get angry, they lose their tempers. They can be incredibly gentle with each other. And that is the joy of living and being with elephants. We have incredible people who work with them. They're all people from the local ethnic group, the Samburu. Now, where's Generia? Is he in this room? No, he's not. There he is. That's one of them. and they're people who have grown up all their lives quite close to wildlife, from the time they're little boys or girls running out, herding the livestock. They see a lot, but they don't normally have the privilege of getting in a mobile steel hide where you can drive up to an elephant and see it at very, very close quarters, literally as close as I am to the front row here. Actually, we even have them come and touch the car. And last Sunday, when Chelsea Clinton was in the car, a small elephant came up and rested its trunk on the bonnet and played around with the aerial. And she was just so thrilled because she really loves elephants, and she has influenced her parents as well. So we have a speciality. We have a small research group. Save Elephants has a speciality in tracking elephants. And we're tracking them not only because we're fascinated by their behavior, but also because, as we heard with the grizzlies, it's very much the same story, that elephants are in an environment of enclosing space. In the case of this place, it's not city people coming to set up their little condominiums in grizzly territory. This is in an area of pastoral people where the government has decided that nomads should settle down, and the modern thing now is that everybody wants to have a plot, they want to get settled, and all the land is being divided. Now the danger, of course, is that if this is not done in a coordinated way, that the great open lands will become closed, much like America was carved up when there was once a time when the buffalo roamed across the Great Plains. Here are my radio collars, and they're all ex-radio collars, and this elephant is investigating each one to see who is wearing it and smell. Now, just to typify the problem of the closing space, I want to talk about mountain bull, who is a magnificent animal that walked up from the lowlands up into the slopes of this splendid mountain, Mount Kenya, which is the second highest mountain in Africa with real peaks. And to do that, he had to go through farmlands. And of course, then there was trouble, then there was conflict, then there was a political problem. So with friends and colleagues, and we're blessed with wonderful collaborators there, both in the private sector and the public, we put together the idea of a corridor. And the corridor had to cross the Cape to Cairo highway. And here it is, crossing it, under. We wondered what was going to happen when we opened it to elephants. But the very first day it was opened, some young elephants came through. And the green there is a young elephant called Tony. We had a collar on him. He was the very first elephant to come under that underpass. The blue there is the corridor, and the red are the trails of mountain bull. Now, mountain bull, you can see, he goes up through the wheat fields, those big expanses. He crosses, and then he goes up and crosses smallholders' land, where he eats their potatoes, and they're not too happy about it. The big question was whether mountain bull would learn to use this corridor. Now, with the help of wonderful friends in the Esri and Google Earth, we were able to animate his movements, except they're not animating, which is, what do I have to do?
Push the button again.
There we go. He's off. He breaks into the corridor, having crossed the small holdings. Then he's locked into the bottom of it, and there's a fence all around the corridor so the elephants can't stray. So he rockets around, hitting the edges, not knowing where to go. This is completely new territory for mountain bull. He's almost like a lobster caught in a pot. Anyway, he's got a motive. So he goes down, and then he races down into the lowlands to the Lewa Conservancy, where I happen to know he was after some ladies, but they evidently weren't there, because he came back very quickly. Hits the fence, comes back into the forest again, and now he tries a special route where he's got a gate that he can open. Crosses the wheat fields once again, and breaks into the corridor and exits through the top end. So this is a pretty unconventional way about learning about a corridor. But I have to tell you, it worked. And mountain bull did learn, and they all learned. And this was a wonderful example of science leading to management, to experimental management, and finding a solution. And we got to find these solutions while we can. It was so eloquently talked about with the grizzly bears this morning, about how there are critical corridors that have to be found, and that's exactly what we're trying to do. Now, that was what happened to mountain bull. Curiously, the day that Chelsea's baby left the hospital, top right. Very strange. He died, and that is our problem right now, that we're in the second holocaust of elephants that started about to get really serious in 2009. And we've been monitoring this all the time. We're part of an international group, the Convention of International Trade in Endangered Species. We have an ongoing body count, and we look at the proportion that are illegally killed. And from that, we can tell whether the poaching is going up or down. So 100,000 elephants killed in 3 years. That was the figure that we worked out with my dear colleague, George Widdemeyer, from Colorado State University, who's the chairman of our scientific board. And as a very young man, he came to work with us, which was 15 years ago. And he's been with us ever since. He's now got an academic position, but he comes out once or twice a year, and he's now beginning to send his own students. So we've got a really good team from international centers of excellence who come to Africa, work with our local excellent people to form a very, very good team. Now, what to do? What to do about this crisis? Basically, there is a need to have awareness, which is what we're doing today, spreading the awareness, but the awareness has spread. It all started really with hearings of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee in May 2012, and then there were articles in the New York Times on the front page. something in National Geographic. Hillary Clinton made a tremendous speech in that same year where she addressed the diplomatic community and stated a new policy on the part of the United States towards elephants, which has then been taken up by Obama. So the awareness is there. Next thing was to get the collaboration between the NGOs. And once again, Hillary invited everybody to a meeting in New York, and actually that willingness to collaborate was there. And then we needed a strategy. So the strategy is very simple, and all the NGOs have combined around it, all the big ones. It's to stop the killing, to stop the trafficking, and to stop the demand for ivory. And what we've done, and this again is very much thanks to Charlie Knowles, who actually suggested the idea to me, we've combined, Save the Elephants combined with the Wildlife Conservation Network, and we've put up what we call an Elephant Crisis Fund. And I have to say, it's only recently been launched. It's been going about 18 months. One of the key places we came to was right here, and right here in Chicago, we raised $250,000. We've got an aim to reach 5 million by the end of this year, and I think we're almost there already. We've had tremendous endorsement. Now here is a list of all the projects we're doing across Africa, and there's too many to talk about, but they're all fit into those three categories. We've got airplanes flying across the Savo. We have an amazing program to tackle the trafficking, which I'm going to tell you about, and then, of course, demand from the Far East, from China and other countries. This is the crucial part of it. We have 30 partners, 47 projects, and 100% of the money on the WCN model goes straight to people in the field with no overheads. We cover the overheads between Save the Elephants and the Wildlife Conservation Network. And we're pretty interested in the science, and this is one of our specialities. So the radio tracking is something that not only can help you to find the corridors and the space and to find the protected areas, it can also help directly with security. This is something unexpected. It was a spin-off. That's our aeroplane, which Frank and I fly. And we do a lot of counting of animals and a lot of tracking. And a lot of the tracking is also remote. So the remote tracking has become very sophisticated. We've used many different collars and systems, and not only the collar is important, but how the data gets stored. It gets stored on a database, on a cloud, and actually it doesn't matter where it lives. It happens to live in North America, and we can now access that. We can see it on our computers and on our telephones. We can look up these maps. We can see where the elephants are. Now, the security people absolutely love that, because most of them love elephants and most of them want to stop the killing. And if they know where a proportion of the elephants are, they organize their patrols around the elephants. Here's what it looks like when we animate it. That's all a computerized screen with every color is a different elephant. And honestly, every morning when we wake up, we open up our iPads or our computers and we look and see where the elephants are. And then we have automated systems that tell us when one stops. There's so many elephants we're tracking. We've got about 100 across Africa. We're tracking from the Kruger National Park right up to northern Kenya, and formerly we were involved in the desert too, near Timbuktu in Mali. So when an elephant stops, we get a signal. Comes onto an iPhone, it says immobility alert, very sinister phrase. And then we go into red alert, and if we watch to see if the elephant starts moving again, or the collar. If it doesn't, we send a patrol out to look. But also, we can tell a lot from how the elephants move. If suddenly there's a stream of elephants going off from one area to another, we know they're probably going in search of food, but they might be going to escape danger too. And we know that elephants are attracted by security. They seek safety. They try to avoid danger. We have a risk landscape that they're very well aware of. Now, near the elephant range, there are dealers. And one of the hardest things has been to tackle the trafficking. But now we have a project in Kenya with a partner, Wildlife Direct, and we're doing a courtroom monitoring procedure. And there's been a huge change in the apprehension and prosecution of dealers over the last, I would say, 18 months. This is Ali Faisal Muhammad, and in 2013 we had 4% of prosecutions resulted in jailing. The maximum fine was $320 for something that might be a haul up to $50,000. It just meant nothing. Now in 2014, we're getting 13% jail and the maximum of $230 fine, and that's actual statistics. So this presents some hope. The other thing that gives us hope is that we're applying our science to the hauls of ivory that get intercepted in the Far East. We have some wonderful colleagues in America, Sam Wasser in Seattle and Professor Turi Serling in Utah, and Sam does DNA analysis, so when hauls of ivory go to the Far East, if they're discovered, you can take a sliver of the DNA, and he has a DNA map of Africa that can trace it back to the origin, which is very, very powerful, both for intelligence and law enforcement. Turi Serling, with whom, again, we're funding both these projects, can tell the age of the ivory from the bomb curve. And this is from radioactive carbon, which was deposited in the atmosphere during the atmospheric tests in the 50s and reached a peak there in the late 50s, and it's been coming down in that exponential curve ever since. Now, you can take any living substance and you can work out the ratio of the radioactive carbon to the non-radioactive, and you can fit it onto that curve within an accuracy of about 1.3 years. Now this becomes critical, especially in relation to the legislation you have developing in the States now, where state by state, people are considering or have actually introduced bans on domestic trade in ivory. And the question always comes up, well, what's legal? My granny had some ivory, can't I sell that? And the answer is yes, providing it was before a certain year. And how do you tell the year? Well, this is the way to tell the year. And we're trying to get Turi Serling's team in Utah together with the German team to join together, because collaboration is what we believe in, and to make this available really in a strict forensic sense. Both the DNA and the isotope data has to have a chain of custody. You have to know that that ivory didn't leave anybody and wander around, and it hasn't been faked up evidence. So it's not easy. The science and the proof of concept is easy, but to institutionalize it is another matter. How am I doing for time? Am I out? No? I'm okay. Okay. So I get excited about the science. I got excited about the science I saw earlier today as well. And I think it's very, very important that we do it. What's been encouraging as well is that recently we've had a lot more seizures of ivory. This is a seizure from Thailand. This is a seizure from the United Arab Emirates. I mean, quite shocking. They had 5 tons there in the United Arab Emirates. We didn't even know about it. But then it was seized. Well, that's great. And this is a batch of ivory that was actually destroyed in Brazzaville, Congo. Now, I'm talking about the last month or two that these seizures came. This is hot off the press. One of the strategies is to deal with this question of stockpiles. stockpiles of ivory threatened to undermine the law. And so there are many options to deal with it, between destroying it to putting it out beyond commercial use. And last year, in 2014, in February, there were 5 African countries that signed on to an environmental protection initiative that agreed to place their stocks beyond commercial use. So that was Botswana, which has the largest population of elephants in Africa, Tanzania, which did have the largest population, Chad, Gabon, and Ethiopia. They led the way. Now others are joining in. But there is pushback too, that there are many countries trying to undermine this, particularly from Southern Africa, and many die-hard people who say that they believe in sustained yield, but I've never seen any sustained yield of ivory that ever benefited elephants so far. So while sustained yield is a great idea for fisheries, as far as elephant ivory is concerned, I think it's a complete no-no. Now, recently in Kenya, actually it was before all those other seizures and burnings, for the second time in history, a major amount of ivory was burnt. So President Kenyatta, just about a month ago, burnt 15 tons of ivory. And that beats even the original thing that Kenya did back in 1989 that led the way when they burnt 12 tons of ivory. He also committed to burning the rest of Kenya's stock before the end of the year. And that stock is something like 110 tons of ivory, of which only 15 has gone so far. So I was very keen that he should be applauded for that action, because honestly, I think we have to take some extreme measures when the elephants are in such danger. Of course, the other thing that is really important is China. And here we have the great Iain, whom we were privileged to host in Samburu. And here he is giving a press conference in Beijing for the Yao Foundation and for all of us, which is Save the Elephants, Wild Aid, and AWF. That is David Doubleon you saw in the second slide. And here he is again as a very proficient ambassador of his country and of the elephants. Well, I want to leave you now with this film. Is there any sound? Let me start again. How do we go back?
That's easy.
Can we go back?
Mm-hmm. Just hit push forward.
Okay. Here we go. So it's back to the matriarch. The matriarch is always the one who comes out to defend her family, and she's the one who puts herself in danger. So the beautiful Li Bingbing, who's not so well known in America, but who is known to probably hundreds of millions of Chinese, came and stayed with us, and she met the living elephant and was moved beyond belief by their family life and how much love and compassion they show to each other. She was deeply moved. And then she came face to face with poaching and just burst into tears. And she's been on side ever since. She went straight back to China, started her own page on Weibo, had an absolutely record coverage of how many million people she reached. And I think that's part of what we need. I have to say that all the Chinese that I've met who came to visit us defied all the stereotypes I've heard about being so mercenary and lacking in compassion and the things we hear written in the press. We strongly feel at Save the Elephants that we shouldn't vilify a whole nation because there are unscrupulous buyers of ivory, which there are. I think many more people now, after Bing Bing and after Yao Ming and after others who are doing the same, are now aware that ivory doesn't drop off elephants, that actually elephants have to die for them to buy ivory. And so this is going to be a key. I think the leadership is probably listening a bit because they want to keep the people happy, and this is not a political issue. We've been given amazing access to the Chinese media. Wild Aid are collaborators, wonderful people, and they've built up a relationship for 15 years or so. They have free space to put out these short PSAs. That one has appeared I don't know how many times. And I would like to find some senior figures who are respected in China, who can get through to the leadership, because ultimately the leadership has the fate of Africa's elephants in their hands. And we can, I think, appeal to them through a mixture of things, but part of it has got to be science. A lot of the officials on whom the leaders rely to tell them their story don't believe Western NGOs. They believe Western NGOs exaggerate. And unfortunately, there has been a lot of exaggeration. So what we stand for at Save the Elephants is hard facts that we can take out to make our case. So, ladies and gentlemen, I can only bid you, all of you, to come and visit us in Kenya. We still have some animals like this. We've been through this crisis before. We beat the crisis. We can do it again. We have a model that works. We need to spread it out. And finally, please come and see us at my wife Oria's camp. She runs a lovely little elephant watch camp. And Natalie Portman has been there and says it's one of the most wonderful places she's ever been. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much for everything you're doing. Is this PSA being shown, where is it being shown? Is it just in China? Is it being shown in this country? Is it?
Now, this is Frank, who's the Chief Operating Officer of Save the Elephants, and he also happens to be my son-in-law. And he will answer.
No, thanks for that. That PSA has actually gone out in front of, in cinemas in all Tier 1 and Tier 2 cities across China. And I think it played for 2 months in front of a broad variety of films. So it got wide play.
Thank you. Regarding male tuskers like mountain bull, I was just wondering if you know how many are left and if there are still enough left for the genetic pool.
The big tuskers are the rarest elephants in Africa and the most at risk because they're the first target of the poachers. The remaining, what we call great tuskers, we call anything that has tusks over 100 pounds a great tusker. And you find them still in the Kruger National Park in South Africa, in Amboseli in Kenya, and in precious few other places. But there are a few. We've had a few in Samburu. They've unfortunately been killed. But we have a special guard on the ones in Tsavo in Kenya. We have a special project to actually look after the great tuskers, and we've donated vehicles and run aerial patrols in Tsavo with the Kenya Wildlife Service. I don't know what's left in the forest. The forest is very, very hard hit.
All right, thank you.
So a question is about the matriarchy and the importance that actually plays for like migration routes, and like you lose that and you lose, you know, culture, you lose over perhaps like generations of, I guess would be intelligence. So when you look at the recovery of some of the calves and the rare incidences where the mother is killed but the calf still remains, like organizations like the David Sheldrick Foundation Trust, how do they respond? Has it been long enough, or is there any sort of scientific research going on where you look at like how do they recover when they are released back in the wild? Do they have any sense of awareness, or can they sort of function as elephants, being orphaned in that case?
Very good question. What happens to the orphans, essentially? In Samburu, we have had about 1/3 of our families were seriously disrupted to the point that every breeding female had been killed. So we have a special study going on at the moment, and we call it the orphan study. So we put collars onto orphans, and we're looking at their strategies for survival. So some of them actually take leadership. Animals as young as 10, 13 years old, they might take leadership, and they're not much more mature than a human being of the same age. Human beings and elephants have a surprisingly similar trajectory in their growing up in terms of the age they reach puberty, and they're by no means mature at that age. Some of the orphans actually seek out other matriarchs who are unrelated to them, and they will follow them around and sort of ingratiate themselves. And at first they get rejected and pushed away, and then sometimes you see that these matriarchs seem to show compassion and they take in these strangers. But it's a process. Others fail and they die. And your question, how much is the social fabric torn? There's very little study as such going on. It's mainly conjecture. But elephants are very resilient, and they can recover from devastating bouts of killing. And in history, there have been several of them that have happened. It happened in Victorian times, when everybody in America wanted to buy a piano with ivory keys. There was a huge slaughter of elephants that went on for knickknacks and artifacts, and they recovered from that. So I'm a bit of an optimist. I don't think that they're going to be forever afflicted if the pressure eases off. One over there.
I was kind of baffled when you mentioned, I think it was 1970, you said, I don't think I need that. Said that
Can you speak in the mic?
the ivory was getting out of hand, the sale of the ivory, the trade. Well, when I was a kid, I seen a Tarzan movie way back in 1932. And I'm just wondering all that time, because that had have been brought to the public eye, and 40 years, was everything got in the way of that being realized? Or did the world just sleep on this situation? I mean, that's a long time, 1932 to 1970, and then I heard you say we realized the ivory trade was, or was that just fictionalized in the movie? Was it not being poached in 1932?
Well, as I recall, Tarzan was looking for the lost hoard of ivory in the place where elephants go to die. That was also something that came out of Aladdin, and I don't think there's any truth in it. There isn't a place where elephants go to die. So Tarzan, I can't remember quite what he did, but I do remember that there were some wicked ivory hunters as well.
Right.
Weren't there? Yeah. Yeah.
That's what I was referring to.
The thing is that Tarzan was sort of a little bit in the pre-scientific age. So elephant research and hard figures never really began until the mid-1960s, not in terms of numbers. And we know that while there was a lot of killing that took place in the 19th century, when the first colonial game laws came in 1900, in parts of Africa they had a big effect and allowed elephants to recover from 1900 right up to through the 10s, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. When the 50s came along, the first national parks were established. And the 1960s was a golden age of new national parks. And at that time, the elephants, which were probably decreasing overall around Africa, they tended to find the national parks as a safe haven, and they would flock into the national parks to seek safety. So when I first started, the problem everybody was talking about was too many elephants in the parks, not too few. They would wipe out the forests very quickly, or the woodlands, and people were debating whether they should cull elephants to help save them from themselves. That all changed when the price of ivory shot up in the early 70s, and the whole scenario changed. And from complaining about too many elephants, we were worried that they were actually on the road down to eradication.
Great. Well, thank you, Iain. Thank you for your timeless support. I do have some real-time updated figures on the Elephant Crisis Fund. Of the $5 million we've raised, $4,963,000. So we have $37,000 to go.